Hello and welcome. I'm Darren, and today we're going to talk about the 9070 XT, or about that launch in general. So the 9070, the RDNA 4 GPUs. Let's just throw it at that. So I kind of have my opinion on this, and it's probably a little bit of a different take, and I'm not sure I've read this take on it. So I kind of wanted to air my thoughts. Before I do that, because I will probably get called a NVIDIA shill by some people, because it's very hard to discuss anything and have a certain take on anything without being, or without upsetting certain people. So I'll make something quite clear first off. The RTX 50 series is a complete failure from what I'm concerned. I think it's probably, I mean, obviously you can't buy them at the moment. If you can buy them and you can buy them out at RRP, you could probably say it's okay for people that don't already have a system, for people looking to upgrade, unless you're upgrading from something quite far back. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, the 50 series to me, which I didn't expect, is very much centered around multi-frame generation, and unless you're running a high refresh monitor like a 240 hertz monitor or a 360 hertz monitor, I don't really see how you can really even use the multi-frame generation. So to me, it's a flop. That doesn't mean that it won't work for other people, but it's certainly not something that I'm excited about or I'm about to praise or shill for. So with that being said, the 9070 and the 9070 XT, which are obviously the two GPUs that are rumored at the moment, I'm probably going to be more interested in 9070 XT. If it's priced anything like AMD did with the XTX and the XT last generation, then I'd imagine everyone would just buy the XT and not the 9070 non-XT, because if there's hardly any price difference in between, I'd imagine the XT will be the superior purchase. Now, in terms of specs, so this is kind of where my take is something that I haven't particularly heard, and I'm surprised I haven't heard it because it's something that is so vocal in the GPU community. So when I say community, I mean obviously if you go on to anything on YouTube that's discussing GPUs, you know, if you watch any of the hardware unbox videos or anything along those lines, if you're on Reddit posts, if you're on Facebook posts, obviously, and you're reading anything to do with GPUs, especially if it's NVIDIA versus AMD, probably the first argument that you will see when it comes to NVIDIA versus AMD, the biggest argument is ray tracing. So ray tracing is a Marmite feature. You love it or you hate it. If you love it, you probably hate the fact that it takes so much resources to use, but you can probably still like the technology. You might not like the resources it uses to run the technology, but you might like it. Or you just have people that flat out hate it. And that's fine, because I have no problem with that. People like what they like. I don't expect people to like what I like. I personally like ray tracing. That doesn't mean in every game I think it has a huge benefit, and that doesn't mean that I particularly want to see it in every game. There's some games that just really do not need ray tracing. In your kind of single player, AAA, more slow-paced, extremely high visual games like what Cyberpunk you could say is, you know, even in something like the New Kingdom Come Deliverance, that could have had ray tracing in it and so on and so forth. The problem with ray tracing is, and it's something that I don't want to see, and I'm sure most people would say the exact same thing, I don't want to see ray tracing added into games with no option to turn it off. I want the option to either be able to turn it on or turn it off. I don't think it's fair that games are going to start adding ray tracing with no option to turn it off. So that might lead into the discussion that we're about to go into, because I'm looking at the 9070 XT, and I think it looks like it could be a fantastic GPU. But at the same time, I see it as have AMD effectively abandoned what their own customers want. And I'm going to explain why. And the reason is because of ray tracing. Now, what they're bringing this generation is no uplift in raster performance. So it's going to, let's say it performs around a 7900 XT. Okay, so they said it might be the 4080 in raster. Well, the 7900 XT in some games does be the 4080 in raster. Well, in some games it's extremely close. There's hardly anything in between it. Obviously, there are outlying games that just perform a lot better on AMD. So the 7900 XT can get very close to the 4080, and it can beat it in games. I'm pretty sure it beats it in Call of Duty. I'm sure there's probably a handful of games that it does the exact same thing. So let's say it's a 7900 XT. Let's call it that. But with the ray tracing performance of, let's say, a 4070 Ti, I believe it's going to be around about that margin. I don't think it's going to, a lot of people are saying it's got the raster performance of a 4080. I don't think it's going to have the ray tracing performance of a 4080, but it might be close depending on the level of ray tracing performance. Obviously, some games are very light on ray tracing, some games are very heavy on ray tracing if you're talking full RT, or in other words, path tracing. So let's say it performs like a 4070 Ti. I mean, effectively, you could probably turn around and call it a 4070 Ti Super. Let's say a 4070 Ti Super. So let's say it is a 4070 Ti Super. Let's say it has there or thereabouts within 10 FPS the same performance in raster. Let's say it has the same performance in ray tracing, and let's say it has the same VRAM, because obviously at this moment in time, it is apparently as rumored. Now, a couple of rumors have surfaced in the last 24 hours. Whether there's any truth to them or not, I don't know, about a 32 gigabyte GPU. But let's say the actual confirmed, because these GPUs have been on the shelf for quite a while, so I think it's pretty safe to say that the confirmations are pretty nailed on. That the highest we know GPU they have this generation is 16 gigabytes. Now, obviously, the 7900 XT last generation had 20 gigabytes, and then you had the 7900 XTX, which had the 24 gigabytes. So effectively, you could say it's a 4070 Ti Super. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally fine. But is that missing the point of what AMD GPU buyers, users, fans, is that missing what they want? Because I personally feel that's completely missing what they want. And the reason I think that is because when you watch any videos comparing GPUs, especially if it's something to do with ray tracing, the users of AMD, and I'm going to be fair before anyone gets crazy out of control. Let me finish what I'm about to say. The AMD GPU buyers and users will say they do not care, they do not want, they do not give a shit about ray tracing. They don't care about fancy reflections and bullshit lighting. All they care about is raster performance. Now, before anyone's triggered, there are plenty of NVIDIA users that say the exact same thing. There are a lot of NVIDIA users that don't care about ray tracing. There's a lot of NVIDIA users that do not care about DLSS, which is the next thing that AMD are bringing. So AMD are effectively bringing ray tracing performance, and they are bringing an AI upscaler, which gets to the second argument that between the AMD users and, as I said, some NVIDIA users, they only care about raster performance and they do not care about upscalers. So effectively, if we're in a position where AMD have launched a 4070 Ti Super a year after the 4070 Ti Super existed, or I don't know the exact time frame, and it comes in at £100 cheaper. What does that actually give us? Like realistically, let's say hypothetically, this launch we get let's say it's faster than that. Let's say it matches the 5070 Ti 5070 Ti. So AMD bring the 9070 XT, which matches the 5070 Ti in absolutely every scenario. It's got 16 gigabytes. It matches it on raster performance. It matches it in ray tracing performance, and FSR4 comes in and is comparable to DLSS. Let's say everything is completely aligned. You kind of think, what was the point? You've got two GPUs that are identical from two different brands. What does that change? Effectively, I can understand that it might sway someone that would use NVIDIA to buy the AMD option being identical, but then it would have to depend on the price, because I'd imagine they're only going to swap a brand that they're used to and they're happy with and everything's been fine with. If they're suddenly going to, there's suddenly going to be a decent price difference that's going to make them think, hey, I'll do that. And that's why I think, did AMD miss what was getting said, and did they not read the room? Do you know what I mean? As in, could AMD have looked at the now NVIDIA users that are vocal on, they don't care about upscalers, and they don't care about frame generation, and they don't care about ray tracing, and all they want is raster performance. And then could have AMD looked at their own fan base that says the reason they don't buy NVIDIA GPUs is because they don't care about ray tracing, they don't care about AI upscalers, and all they want is raster performance and more VRAM. Could AMD have completely given up on all of those metrics, said, we're not doing RT, we're not even going to have RT cores, stuff that, we're not going to do it. Do we need AI accelerators for upscalers? No, we don't, because the people that use our GPUs and the people that use NVIDIA GPUs, we might be able to sway them across, because we're not going to do any of that stuff. We are going to offer just pure raster performance and more VRAM and a cheaper cost, because we're not going to put money into research and development for all of these AI using processes. And we're going to build the cheapest, faster raster GPU packed with a load of VRAM, and we don't care about competing on the ray tracing and the AI upscaler. And that I find interesting, because I don't know where the arguments go when these new GPUs come out. Do people buy the new AMD GPUs and they didn't care about ray tracing, but suddenly they do care about ray tracing? Like, what GPU were they moving from to suddenly say, oh, I didn't care about ray tracing, but now I suddenly do care about ray tracing, or I didn't care about upscalers, but suddenly now I do care about upscalers? That's going to be an interesting conversation. But at the same time, you almost think, okay, so the customers that will then buy this GPU, like I said, you could have bought a 4070 Ti Super a year ago, and you could have been using it. If that's what you cared about, you could have been using it for the last year, and you could have enjoyed it for the last year, and you could now be using it for the next 2 years going forward. Or let's say even worse than that, what happened if you bought, let's say, a 6800 XT a year ago for $500, $600, and you now buy a 9070 XT for $600? You've just paid $1,200 when you could have bought a 4080 2 years ago for $1,200, and you could have enjoyed it for the last 2 years, and you can enjoy it for the next 2 years going forwards. So effectively, you've paid $1,200 for 2 GPUs. You could have had that in 1 GPU 2 years ago. Now, I know obviously people have money restrictions, so I'm not saying that everyone should go out and buy that level of GPU. And I'm not saying people could obviously afford to just go out and spend 1,200 in, one outing if they've bought 600 2 years ago and they're spending 60. I know obviously there's different financial ways around it, but the cold hard facts are, if you've bought, if you paid 600 2 years ago and now you're paying another 600 for the next 2 years, you could have paid 1,200 2 years ago and you'd be paying that over the same amount of time. Because if you bought a 4080, when it launched 2 years ago for 1,200, you're not going to buy anything that AMD are bringing at this moment in time that's going to beat it for the next 2 years. So that's kind of where I am with obviously a 4080 running in this system here. So it's almost a case of, I think the 9070 XT could be a fantastic GPU, but at the same time, I think it could be a fantastic GPU because it has the features that I like, and those features I like is why I tend to use a NVIDIA GPU over an AMD GPU. I buy the NVIDIA GPU because of the ray tracing performance and the AI upscaler. People will call me dumb for that reason. I'm not fucking dumb. I just like what I like. That's fair enough. I don't call people dumb because they only like raster. That's totally fine. Obviously, people have their different likes and different wants. I have absolutely no problem with that. I don't call someone dumb for not agreeing with me. People can have their different opinions, and these aren't really, these are all subjective opinions. You can't call someone dumb for having a subjective opinion. But yeah, obviously AMD are bringing these features, which is fine, and a lot of people have argued that they need to compete, and I'm probably one of those people that have voiced the same opinion, but I'm kind of now looking at it at a different point of view and thinking, did they need to compete? Should they have competed, or should they have gone in the exact opposite direction? Because there are AMD users that want the opposite, and there's also NVIDIA users that want the opposite. So like I said, this isn't about AMD users, it's also about NVIDIA users. And you think there are a lot of games, there are a lot of people that will play your first-person shooters. They don't care about ray tracing and upscalers. They just want pure raw performance. Esports games, they don't worry about that. They want to turn their settings down low and run at like 500 or 600 FPS. They don't want those features. And you think there is probably quite a big market that I believe now, in hindsight, that AMD could have probably catered for if they just ignored this. Because the way I'm seeing it now is, if they bring and they match NVIDIA in every exact way, they match them on raw performance, they match them on ray tracing performance, and they match them with a comparable AI upscaler, you've just got two cards that are exactly the same, but with a different brand name on them. And I don't know what that does. I'm not sure in the market where that sits. Does that make anyone that would have normally bought the NVIDIA card buy the AMD GPU? If there's a huge saving in money, maybe. I don't know. I mean, obviously, time will tell. We will find out, obviously, when they launch. Will AMD claw? So, I think probably for new, maybe for people that don't have. If you're new to PC gaming and you're looking for a GPU and you're about to do a build and you do some research, if your options, well then, obviously, if this launches and it launches about the same time as a 5070 Ti and it's around about the same as a 5070 Ti, I don't think it'll have the ray tracing performance, and I don't think they're going to be quite as advanced with the AI upscaler. So it needs to be quite a bit cheaper than the 5070 Ti. If they would have launched a GPU that was faster, let's say, for instance, they didn't do it. They didn't do the ray tracing performance. They didn't do the AI upscaler. And they instead opted to launch a GPU that was faster than the 7900 XTX. Didn't have to have 24 gigabyte of VRAM. Let's say it had 18 or 20 gigabytes of VRAM, faster than 7900 XTX. And it was the same price as what the 7900 XT. So say it's $600 or $700, faster than the XTX. 20 gigabytes of VRAM, no RT performance, like that's gone, and then without an upscaler, would that have sold more than the GPU that might launch, and it might be £100 cheaper than the 5070 Ti Super, or sorry, the 5070 Ti? It might be £100 cheaper, but it pretty much is around about the same GPU. I actually think the raster, if they would have built something that was faster than the XTX, so let's say it was faster, let's say it had the raster performance of the 4090, let's say it had the raster performance of a 4090 for $600, 20 gigabytes of VRAM, or even 18, let's say 18 gigabytes of VRAM, 4090 raster performance, completely screwed on RT, but that doesn't matter. And they just left FSR where it was because people don't care about it and they didn't use it. Would that have outsold the GPU that they're about to launch in the 9070 XT? I actually think it would have. Now, could they have built that GPU? I don't know. If they were putting more money into, like, they've obviously put money and time and research and development into FSR4. You're obviously using, I don't know the technical way that it works. If you're using your GPU die space to, instead of using what you'd have as your raster performance, whatever cores it would be, if you're taking up space away from the amount of cores that you put on it because you're replacing those with dedicated ray tracing cores and dedicated AI, could you take all of those off and replace those with perform? I don't know the architecture. I'm sorry, I don't know that far. But would that be the case? Would they have been able to launch something faster than the XTX, cheaper than the XTX, lowered the amount of VRAM on it by a small amount, and just ignored AI upscalers and ray tracing performance? And would that actually have served better, not only for AMD users, but actually potentially to sway the NVIDIA users? Because I'm going to be honest, I would have probably bought that. I'd probably be more likely to buy that myself because I've got the ray tracing performance if I want it and the AI upscaler on the NVIDIA GPU. To actually have something at 4090 raster power for those games like not that I particularly play that type of game now, but for your Call of Duties or your first-person shooters, or even like I'm a Tarkov player. And in Tarkov, at native, I mean, the native AA isn't particularly great, but if it was an absolute killer in that game, in just raw performance, if I was suddenly running that at 4K max settings, raw performance at 140, like maxing out my refresh rate 144 hertz, then that could have been quite an interesting GPU, especially if that was around the $600-700 mark. So I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think. Did AMD do the right thing, or did they not read the room? Because I've not actually heard people saying this, and I'm quite surprised. Because there are a very vocal, and like I said, it's not just AMD users, but I believe that is the main reason why people choose AMD, because they want the raster performance and they want the more VRAM. And they don't care about ray tracing, and they don't care about AI upscalers. So, did they not read the room? Let me know, and I'll catch you in the next one.